My name is Sylvia, and at 32, I never imagined a single Thanksgiving dinner could reroute my entire life. People like to say family is the safest harbor, the warm port you return to after weathering the world. For me, the house I grew up in was a stage, every day a tense production with fixed roles, a demanding mother, a silent father, and a daughter living in the constant fear of never being enough. I grew up in the suburbs outside Philadelphia in a brick colonial on a street lined with neatly shaved lawns, maples blazing each fall, and windows glowing warm at Christmas time. From the outside, it was the perfect picture of middle-class stability. Neighbors praised my parents for their cozy holiday parties, the matching sweaters, the photos before the lavish tree, the proud postcard smiles. What they never saw were the fine cracks running behind those red bricks. My mother, Carol, always conducted the orchestra. She had bright eyes and a commanding voice, qualities that made outsiders admire her as a confident woman who had everything under control. To me, Carol was an unblinking magnifying glass, a voice that never stopped probing, enlarging every small flaw in my life into a major fault. Nothing I did was ever enough. A single point off a test became failure. An unmade bed meant irresponsible, and even my voice was wrong, too loud or too soft, depending on her mood. My father, George, was physically present but emotionally absent. He hid behind the newspaper or buried himself in work, leaving Carol to steer the weather of our home alone. In my memory, he is more shadow than man, appearing in the family photos but rarely as comfort. His silence turned me into the only shield against my mother's unending storm. From early on, I learned to live on alert. I walked a tightrope, bracing for any step to trigger a cascade of cutting remarks. When other children brought home quizzes and were pulled into hugs, I got the question, "Why did you miss this one?" Joy was always siphoned out of me by my mother's frown. I remember the third-grade science fair. I spent weeks drawing each planet, measuring distances to scale, building a careful model. My teacher was so impressed she sent it to the district fair, and I won first prize. It should have been a cherished moment. But when the principal handed me the blue ribbon, the first eyes I searched for were my mother's, not my teacher's or my friends'. Instead of pride, I found arms folded tight, lips pressed thin. In front of everyone, she said, "Jupiter's a little lopsided and the handwriting sloppy." The joy collapsed inside me, replaced by the familiar helplessness of never touching the approval I craved. The script kept repeating. When I was chosen as high school valedictorian, a privilege I fought hard for, Carol made the day into a lesson in humiliation. I bought a new dress with bookstore wages and had my hair neatly done. That morning, as I came down the stairs, the first words she said were, "Your hair looks frizzy, and that dress widens your shoulders. Why didn't you pick something flattering? People will stare." Her critique looped in my head throughout the ceremony, so even as the audience applauded my speech, all I could hear was her cool voice. "You mispronounced a word." Memories like that carve into you, teaching you that love and acceptance are earned only with perfection. But my mother's perfection moved with her mood, making the pursuit impossible. That impossibility eroded my confidence until I became an adult always braced, always waiting for the next blow. Every family gathering was a stage with Carol at center. If anyone praised me, she'd redirect the conversation or highlight a flaw to cut me down. Even my successes became proof of her failure as a mother. I wasn't allowed joy of my own. Any light that touched me had to reflect through her lens first. When it came time for college applications, I knew I needed out. I chose Boston University, 3 hours away, even though I had a scholarship closer to home. The day I got the acceptance, my mother compared me to a friend's daughter who'd made Harvard. When I said BU's program was excellent, she replied, "Well, I suppose they had to take someone." Belittlement was her native tongue. Distance gave me air. For the first time, I could breathe without waiting for judgment. I made friends, earned respect from professors, rebuilt bits of confidence. But old wounds don't vanish with a new zip code. They seep into your relationships. I either chased approval and lost myself, or I built cold walls and pushed people away. My first loves ended the same, boyfriends leaving because they couldn't scale the wall. One even said, "I'm not your mother, Sylvia." It was painful and accurate, and it forced me to look inward. My engagement to Michael unraveled over wedding invitations. I froze, terrified of choosing wrong. With a mother like mine, right never existed, only an endless taxonomy of wrong. Michael couldn't understand, and I couldn't explain. We broke. A friend urged therapy. I found Dr. Williams, who specialized in family trauma. Our first session opened a door to a new world. She helped me see that my mother's behavior didn't reflect my worth. It reflected my mother's own fear and unhealed wounds. The pain didn't vanish, but I gained something precious: distance between who I am and who my mother says I am. Still, part of me longed for her love. Every few months I returned to Philadelphia with a fragile hope that this time might be different. Each time I left, disappointed. But hope persisted, like a stubborn root gripping stone. Everything funneled into one unexpected invitation: "You should come home for Thanksgiving." To anyone else it was ordinary. To me it was the bell before a faded opening scene, an unknown ending, but certain to change me. On a Tuesday night, in my Boston apartment lit by the glow of campaign reports, my phone rang. The name, Carol, stabbed my gut. Whenever she called, my body tightened, ready for a storm. I steadied my voice. "Hi, Mom." The surprise wasn't that she called, but how she sounded. No chilly edge, no practice belittling. Slow, almost gentle. "You should come home for Thanksgiving this year. I'll make the cranberry stuffing. Your father would love to have you." I blinked. Every cell warned me to be careful, yet the invitation felt like a bridge instead of a trap. I stammered, "I already planned Friendsgiving in Boston." "I know, but it would be nicer with you here." "The Petersons are coming, and the Johnsons too. You remember Margaret and Walter?" Guests cut both ways. An audience sometimes made Carol restrain herself. She knew how to play perfect mother on stage. But an audience also gave her polite rapping for sharp knives only I could feel. "Sounds good," I heard myself say, despite reason tugging at my sleeve. "What can I bring?" "Just yourself," she answered, with a rare tenderness that nearly made me drop the phone. After we hung up, I stared at the darkening screen. Carol had been almost kind. Almost. Maybe her recent surgery had changed her. Or was this the quiet before the storm? Either way, I said yes. Partly hope, partly a need to prove to myself I could prepare, could face her without being crushed. I planned like armor, gifts first. Bringing food to Carol's house was suicidal. She'd compare, criticize, and prove I'd never measure up. So I chose neutral territory, a fine Cabernet from a respected cellar and an award-winning artisanal chocolate cake from a Boston bakery. Elegant enough to impress, not threatening enough to challenge the reigning hostess. Then clothes. I spent hours finding a look both professional and festive. A deep plum dress, elegant but not flashy, tailored coat, modest heels, delicate gold jewelry. Nothing too showy for boastful, nothing too plain for sloppy. Every choice was a chess move. Hair and nails were part of the plan, trim and soft waves, neutral manicure, even a facial to preempt comments about my skin. In my suitcase, beyond clothing, I packed a quiet emergency kit, anti-anxiety meds, a small notebook to ground myself, a backup outfit in case she attacked the first. I booked a hotel downtown, an exit if needed. I don't travel without escape routes. At therapy before the trip, I told Dr. Williams everything. She listened and asked, "What happens if it's too hard?" "I'll endure it like always," I said, hearing the old pattern in my own mouth. "No, Sylvia, you have choices. You can step back. You can leave. Your presence is a kindness, not an obligation. We practice responses. I'm not comfortable with that comment. Can we change the subject? Or, I need a moment. Short, steady lines, lifelines to grab when the squall hit. Leaving her office, I wasn't sure I'd have the courage to use them, but for the first time, I knew I had the right. The night before I left, I ate with my Boston friend Olivia. Over pasta and wine, I shared a slender hope that maybe this time would be different. She sounded almost gentle, I said. Olivia raised an eyebrow. I hope you're right, but don't set yourself up. If it goes bad, call me. My door's open. On the drive down, late autumn trees dulled to brown, mirroring my mix of dread and anticipation. As I turned onto my old street, my stomach knotted. The tidy colonials, manicured lawns, Thanksgiving decor, all so peacefully false. A passerby would see a perfect suburb. Only I knew the minefields behind each door. I parked at the red brick house and inhaled. I'm an adult with a job and a life, I whispered. My mother's opinions are opinions, not truth. Before I could ring, the door opened. Carol stood there in a neat cream sweater, platinum hair perfectly brushed. She smiled, almost sincerely for a blink. You're here. Come in before it gets cold. Then she did the unthinkable. She hugged me, brief, stiff, but a hug. I froze as my suitcase slid from my hand. Confused, I let a thin hope flare. Maybe this time would be different. The house was thick with the scent of roasting turkey, fresh bread, and cinnamon from a simmering potpourri. It looked warm, like a family movie. To me, every detail was a flawless shell covering a ticking device. Guests gathered in the living room. My father chatted with Walter Peterson, half hiding behind his glass. Margaret offered a polite smile, eyes flicking over me with a tinge of pity as Carol introduced, This is Sylvia, my daughter. She works in advertising in Boston. The way she stretched advertising made my career sound like a hobby rather than the senior position I'd clawed my way into. She quickly compared me to the Johnson's son, a successful New York lawyer at 34. In under 5 minutes, she'd placed me below the line. I swallowed irritation and remembered Dr. Williams. Choose your battles. I smiled at Linda Johnson. Congratulations on your son. That's wonderful. Linda's eyes warmed with gratitude that I'd punctured the unspoken ranking. Carol didn't let me breathe long. In the kitchen, as we prepped starters, she began. You spaced the crackers too far apart. And that sweater, snug, isn't it? Stress eating again? I steadied my breath. It's a fitted cut, Mom. I'm working with a nutritionist. She shrugged, unconvinced, then dissected my old engagement. Such a shame about Michael. Such a nice family. Another knife? I bit my lip. We wanted different things. He's found someone better for him. Carol sighed. Well, some girls know how to hold on to happiness. Others don't. I stayed quiet, arranging plates, refusing the spiral. Back in the living room, Linda reeled me into conversation. I heard you were recently promoted? I smiled, grateful. Yes, I'm now a senior marketing director. Our team just won the Horizon account. Carol cut in, only because a coworker went on maternity leave. I corrected, calm. It was a fair competition. She actually transferred to the West Coast. The room thickened. Thankfully, Paul Johnson told a work mishap that got people laughing, but the discomfort simmered. In the bathroom mirror, the concealer still held, but tension shadowed my eyes. I did a grounding exercise. 5 things I could see, 4 I could touch, 3 sounds, 2 scents, 1 taste. My heart settled. I returned to the table for the next round. Carol set the table like an exhibit. Bone china with gold rims, crystal glasses, a fall centerpiece of gourds and tapered candles. Beautiful and chilly as a battlefield, she placed me opposite her, squarely in range. The first minutes went smoothly. Good food will do that. Then Carol launched. She turned my long-ago frozen turkey disaster into a family joke. Polite chuckles rippled. I replied, "At least everyone loved my Brussels sprouts that year." "Well, tastes differ." She smiled, sharp at the edges. Her wineglass never stayed empty. With each sip, her words slipped their disguises. When I mentioned my Friendsgiving cranberry muffins in Boston, she interrupted, "I'm not using your grandmother's stuffing recipe this year. I found a much better one in Bon Appetit." Sometimes traditions need improvement. My chest pinched. That recipe was one of the few traditions that made me feel I belonged. She erased it with a breezy line. After the main course, Carol stood with her glass. "Tradition says everyone shares a gratitude." She made it a monologue. Looking back on my life, my sacrifices, my unfinished dreams, my greatest mistake was Sylvia. The air froze, heart stopped. I heard my pulse like a drum. She continued, eyes like a blade. "She fled to Boston and never comes home. No husband, no children. A meaningless job. After everything I gave, all I get is disappointment." Each word turned in me like steel. I stared at my shaking hands. In that instant, I was both the child cowering under rain and the grown woman being executed in public. But instead of crumpling, a strange calm washed over me. I set my napkin down, stood, and lifted my water glass. "I'd like to respond," I said, voice steady. I met her eyes. "For 32 years, I twisted myself into knots to please you. The truth is, I was never enough. Not because I'm lacking, but because you can't see. What you said speaks more about you than me." I named what I'd built: my job, my home, the relationships that taught me real lessons. I apologized to the guests for witnessing this. Then I turned back to Carol. "I've been your last ally. Tonight you lost that ally. Until you acknowledge what you've done and change, I'll protect myself by limiting contact." Red rose in her cheeks. She snapped, "How dare you speak to me like that in my own house?" "Your answer tells me everything," I said quietly. "Thank you for the clarity." I took my coat, my purse, and walked to the door. "Goodbye, Mom. I hope one day you understand why this is necessary." The room was stone silent. Guests watched, stunned and helpless. Carol sat, face torn between fury and shock. I didn't look back. Outside, the November wind slapped my cheeks, cold and clean. For the first time in my life, I felt no pull to go back and smooth things over. My mother's opinion, once the axis of my world, suddenly had no power. When the door shut behind me, the wind felt like a baptism. I trembled, not from cold but adrenaline. My hands shook as I turned the car key. The drive to the hotel blurred. I turned on the radio and heard nothing. The scene replayed and replayed, stunned faces, Carol's hard glare, my father a statue in his chair. Only in the hotel garage did the wave break. I leaned on the steering wheel, sobbing, tears with the salt of release, not defeat. For the first time, I hadn't stayed quiet. My phone buzzed. Jessica, my best friend from high school. Her voice rushed out. "Sylv, are you okay? Linda Johnson texted me. She said there was a disaster at your mom's." I gave her the short version. Jessica listened, cursing on my behalf. "Where are you staying?" "Marriott, downtown." "Come here. The kids will make you laugh. No one should sit in a hotel room alone after that." I hesitated, then agreed. An hour later, I was on Jessica's couch, surrounded by sticky plates and bedtime chaos, the kind of honest, messy warmth Carol's house never had. Right then, I realized family can be chosen by love, not blood. The next morning, I saw 3 missed calls from an unknown number. My father. When I called back, he began halting. "What your mother said, Ben, wasn't appropriate." "It was cruel," I said. He sighed, then retreated. "She wants you back this weekend to talk it through." "I can't, not now. Maybe not ever." A long silence, then 4 words. "I understand. Drive safe." No defense, No promise of change. His complicit silence was wound number 2. Another buzz. Text from Carol. How dare you humiliate me? I sacrificed my life for you. I read the angry scroll, and for the first time they didn't pierce me. They floated like old lures that had lost their hooks. After a breath, I blocked her number. Back in Boston, therapy became my anchor. I told Dr. Williams everything, from standing at the table to crying in the garage. She nodded. That boundary was overdue. How do you feel a week later? Awful. And right. Like I finally stopped pretending a burning house was cozy. We talked about the leftover guilt, not for what I said, but for not saying it sooner. She met my eyes. You did it when you were ready. Readiness can't be forced. At work, my boss Rachel noticed. You seem more present. Something change? I smiled. A holiday I won't forget. Freed from chasing Carol's approval, I poured energy into leadership that looked nothing like hers. Encouragement instead of cutting, clarity instead of ambiguity. My assistant said, "Your feedback makes me want to improve, not just avoid mistakes." I froze at the realization. I'd turned my wounds into wisdom. In April, I met Ryan at a charity auction. We started as friends and then more. When I told him the Thanksgiving story, he just said, "That took enormous courage. Thank you for trusting me." For the first time, I was in a relationship where my boundaries signaled maturity, not frigidity. The biggest surprise came from my father. 6 months later, he asked me to lunch in Boston. At a small Harborview restaurant, he admitted, I failed. I saw things but stayed quiet because it was easier. After Thanksgiving, I started reading about emotional abuse, and I began seeing a therapist. I nearly dropped my fork. He'd never acknowledged anything. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a door cracked open. We began rebuilding, awkward and slow, but real, outside my mother's lens. Carol, of course, didn't loosen her grip. She emailed a mix of blame and defensiveness. Everything I did was for you. I answered only when calm, in neutral tone. Once she showed up at my Boston door unannounced. I didn't invite her in. "This isn't how we rebuild," I said. "If you want a relationship, it starts with respectful communication." She left angry and wounded. I didn't waver. The next Thanksgiving, I stood in my own apartment over a simple table set for my chosen family. No perfect china, no elaborate centerpiece, just laughter and warmth. I raised my glass. I'm grateful for friends who showed me what real love looks like, and for this path, painful at times, that led to freedom. In the candlelight, I knew I had finally stepped out of Carol's shadow. I wasn't living for her approval. I was living as myself. A year after that confrontation, Thanksgiving no longer felt like a ritual to endure. It became a day to look forward to. I set a mismatched table, plaids and wildflowers from the market. Friends brought homemade dishes from lasagna to Vietnamese spring rolls. No performance, just voices crossing and laughter ringing. Orion became a steady part of my life. We traveled to Vermont in winter, told childhood stories by the fire, good and bad. When I shared how Carol diminished me for years, he didn't fix or dodge. He listened and held my hand. "I don't need you perfect," he said. "I need you real." For the first time, I believed love could be free of conditions. My father kept changing, clumsily but sincerely. Short phone calls turned into regular lunches. He spoke about therapy, admitted how his silence hurt me. One day he said, "I'll never be a perfect father, but if you'll let me, I'd like to be a present one now." I nodded, choking up. It didn't erase the past, but it laid a foundation for what could be built. Carol still sent emails, sometimes cajoling, sometimes accusing. "I only want what's best for you. If you call, I'll explain." I read them with clear eyes. I replied briefly when I could and stayed quiet when I needed to. Once she asked Uncle David to relay, "She misses you." Let bygones be bygones, I answered. I'll talk when she acknowledges the harm and truly wants to change. Without that, I can't go back to the old terms. My uncle sighed. For me, it was a non-negotiable truth. Freed from the hunger for her approval, I invested in myself. I took an evening creative writing class, recording my healing. The first essays were shaky. Then I realized telling my story was part of recovery. An editor who found my blog invited me to write for a mental health magazine. When The Thanksgiving That Changed Me came out, hundreds of readers emailed their stories. I wasn't alone. At a workshop on family boundaries, I spoke about Carol. My voice trembled but held. Afterward, a middle-aged woman hugged me. I just survived a dinner like that. Your story gave me hope. I understood. By telling the truth, I wasn't only saving myself, I was handing a match to others in the dark. One spring night, I had friends over for pizza and a movie. We laughed until our sides hurt. I looked around and thought, this is my family. No shared blood, but full of honesty, respect, and love. I realized Carol might never change, and I no longer needed her to. I had found my own ground, far beyond her shadow. On the second Thanksgiving after that night, I lifted my glass to the people I love. I'm grateful for this journey, for finding strength and truth, and for all of you, for giving me a real family. The toast rang, laughter followed, and my heart felt light and wide. I was no longer the girl who curled in on herself under criticism, nor the 32-year-old shamed at a holiday table. I had crossed out of the dark and for the first time was fully myself, free, whole, enough. If you asked me which moment marked my true coming of age, I wouldn't choose graduation, my first big title, or the day I bought my apartment. It came on a Thanksgiving night when I rose from a crowded table, faced the mother who had criticized me my whole life, and spoke the truth I'd swallowed for decades. It wasn't a polished speech. It was a survival reflex. I will not be diminished anymore. From that second, my life split in two, before and after. Some think boundaries are selfish, a sign of coldness. My experience taught me the opposite. Boundaries are the foundation of healthy love. I used to believe that if I worked harder, learned more, achieved more, looked better, my mother would soften. I spent years contorting myself, only to meet a painful truth. Her approval was never coming. Setting boundaries isn't abandoning family. It's abandoning the illusion that we can fix a relationship by sacrificing ourselves. It's the declaration, I deserve respect, even here. That night, my father said nothing as I was cut down. His silence hurt as much as Carol's words. Later, he admitted the passivity and began his late healing. I learned silence is a choice. It protects the silent one, but wounds the other. We don't always need heroes, but we do need people who will speak. I built a different kind of family. Jessica, who opened her door that chaotic night. Ryan, the first love who proved I didn't need perfection to be worthy. Colleagues who saw ability, not flaws. And me, finally part of the family I chose. Family isn't always blood. Family is where you're safe to be yourself, where people show up for your triumphs and your collapses. Rewriting my story turned wounds into testimony. When my first essay ran, strangers reached out with their own echoes. I wasn't alone. By speaking up, I helped clear a path for others. Whenever someone writes, because of your story, I finally set a boundary with my mother, I know my pain transformed into a shared strength. People ask, have you forgiven her? My answer, forgiveness isn't denial. I can understand my mother, even have compassion for her injuries, without letting myself be hurt again. If I forgive, it's for me to set down anger. Forgiveness doesn't reinstate the old arrangement. The truth is, her love was never healthy. I deserve better. If you hear yourself in my story, let me say this. You don't need to wait for a Thanksgiving showdown to find your voice. You have the right to draw a line now. You can say, this hurts me. I won't accept it anymore. You will shake. You will feel guilty. You will fear being called selfish, but I promise, beyond the shaking lies a freedom you've never known. 1 year, 2, then 3 have passed since that night. I still get long emails from Carol. I still have flashbacks. The difference is this: they no longer define my worth. I've learned we don't have to suffer to be loved. Family can be redefined. Truth, even painful, is the road to real connection. And boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. Doors to a life where we can breathe, love, and be ourselves. Tonight, after dinner with friends, a candle still flickers. I raise my glass in quiet, not to celebrate anyone else, but to celebrate myself, the woman who found her voice, stood up in the dark, and chose the road of truth. And if you're out there listening to this, I hope you find the strength to do the same.